Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive can probably say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. There were less people you would expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't put up with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde, and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time parading over garden fences, spying on neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think of what neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursley knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on a dull gray Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange, mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny owl fluttering past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. "Little tyke," chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out on number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive. There wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road. He watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading a sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in fine clothes. They'd get up to sullen young people. He supposed this was a stupid new fashion. He trimmed his fingers on the steering wheel and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos, standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, the man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him! For it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. Traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in Grunning's car park, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owl swooping past in broad daylight, though people down the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as the owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. He had forgotten all about the people in their cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This lot were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. He was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. "The Potters, that's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry." Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whispers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking, no, it's stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. I'm sure there are lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he was even sure if his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. Might have been Harvey or Harold. Harold Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That's a great title. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She was always got so upset at the mention of her sister. He didn't blame her, if he had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. "Sorry," he grunted as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a red cloak. He didn't seem at all except at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said, in a squeaky voice that made passers-by stare, "Don't be sorry, Mr. Sir, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who was gonna last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy day." And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had also been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, wherever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped before, because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of the number 4, first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he had spotted that morning. It was now sitting on the garden wall. He was sure it was the same one, had the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" Mr. Dursley said loudly. The cat didn't move. They gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dursley had a nice normal day. She told him over dinner all about the Mrs. next door's problems with her daughter, and how Dudley had learnt a new word.